Hi, and welcome back to Real Woodworking and Design. On today's episode, we're going to be building a toy box. And this toy box is actually going to be for my little nephew, Matthew. He actually was just born a couple months ago, so he's a brand new addition to our family that we're all very happy and excited for. And I'm very happy and excited too that I get to build this toy box for him. The toy box itself actually has a little bit of a back history. This is something that my grandfather used to do all the time for all his great-grandchildren, is he would build a toy box for them. But ever since he passed away last year, that tradition has kind of now stopped. And so I figured, well, why don't I pick it up where he kind of left off, and I will continue the tradition. I think that's something that he would have loved to see happen, and now I get to do it for my little nephew Matthew. So I'm very excited about that, and I can't wait to get in, get involved into the project. Like I said, this one here has a little bit more of a meaning to it, which is going to make it all that more special. So we've got our stuff all set up and ready to go, and we're ready to start building this thing. So I say we jump right into it and get started. The first thing that we're going to do is, as you can see, we have our stack of lumber right here. Basically we bought it, straight from the lumber yard. So I mean, it's fairly milled down to a certain size. I mean, because there is different milling stages that they go through. That when you purchase your lumber, you could get it at different milling stages. This one here happens to be milled pretty much on all four sides. So there's really not a whole lot of milling I have to do to this, but we will be cutting these pieces down to size. These are 1x10s by 7 feet long, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to mill them down on the joiner and maybe run them through the planer a little bit. I'm going to check on the size, the thickness that I want. Maybe just any little cups or bows that might be in the board. It's always good to run it through the planer, and also, like I said, on the joiner too, to just get those little little imperfections out of it. It's always good to do that. But mainly the jointing that we're going to concentrate on, because basically what we're going to have to do with these is we're gluing two of these up together to create a wider board. So basically we have to get two nice square edges together, and then after we do that, we're going to take our biscuit joiner and we're going to biscuit them together, glue them up, let it sit, and then once that procedure is done, we're going to then mill it through the table saw and cut them down to size and get them to the width and the length that we need them, and then assemble them. So the first thing that we're going to do is run in through the joiner planer and get those square edges done. We got our joiner set up right here. Basically what we're going to do, because I said that we're going to have to joint one edge of the board, so that way when we glue them up, there's a nice tight seam, and the glue up will be really nice. Right now we have our jointer set up to take off basically a 1/64 of an inch off of the boards. I don't want to take off too much because like I said at the beginning of the episode, these are 1x10s. So with a 1x10, typically it's about 9¼ inches wide. And being that we are gluing up these two boards, two 1x10s, my full height of the toy box, we want it to be roughly around 18 inches in height. So with 9¼ and 9¼ we roughly have about 18½ inches of height. So that ½ inch of extra that we have gives us the ability to run the pieces through the joiner to get the square edges. And that's why we're only taking off a 1/64 of an inch. And the other thing is too, when you are picking out your lumber, you do want to make sure that you don't have too much of a crown or a bow to it, because the more crown or bow that you have, the more it's going to take, more passes it's going to take in order to get that board square and true again. And when you're dealing with a project like this where we want it to be a certain height, you don't want to have to take off too much material, because then you're going to be smaller than what your pieces are going to allow. So I made sure that the boards that we picked were nice and straight, and there wasn't a whole lot of curvature to them. So basically we probably only need to run it through once, maybe twice, to get that nice square edge. We'll do it to the next piece as well, and then we'll be able to glue it up and it'll be a nice tight seam. So let's get running them through there. I mentioned too, before we get running our boards through, I just wanted to point out a couple things that you want to have in place before you start running your boards through. First off, again, with us being in a smaller shop, you always want to make sure that you have adequate room behind and in front of your saw. That way when you're running your pieces through, you're not hitting into anything and stuff like that. Also, look at the area around you. You don't want to be tripping over anything when you're operating these machines. And you also want to be able to make sure that you have proper push sticks and also safety glasses. As you all might see in this, my safety glasses are a little old. Might have been one of my grandfather's, but you know, it's what I had around right now, so if they freak you out a little bit, I am sorry, because they are kind of old-fashioned. In this case, we probably won't need the push stick just because the board is so wide. I'll be able to hold on to it high enough to where my hands aren't anywhere near the blade. So, but definitely for smaller pieces, you definitely want to make sure that you have your push stick ready. That way you're not reaching for it while the machine's on and there's no danger there. So basically we're going to take our first couple boards, we're going to run them through and get our square edges. Now there was just a couple things that I wanted to point out with that. First of all, once you do joint an edge, you always want to make sure that you mark that edge with an arrow or some type of pencil line. That way you know that's the edge that you jointed. That way when you put them together, you know what side to glue. Now typically I could do both sides, but again I'm trying to leave as much material on there as possible. That way when I do run it through the table saw to get my final dimensions, you know, I'm not taking off a lot of material, but I'm taking off enough to where, you know, I could control that. So you don't want to bring it right down to the last 64th of an inch to where you're running that, trying to run that through your table saw. Not that you can't, but it's a little bit easier when you're taking off maybe like a quarter or an eighth off of your blade. So in this case, I'm only going to route one edge and not worry about the other side, because once it's glued up, I'll then rip it through the table saw. One other thing I wanted to mention, with some of my stands here, I still have to do some modifications with some of my wheel-based stands, because again, a lot of my tools are on wheels. And the biggest importance that I'm seeing is that I've got to put on locking casters underneath my wheels, because as I was pushing that through, I did notice that the machine did want to start moving on me a little bit. So definitely anybody out there with your tools on mobile bases, make sure they have locking casters, because you know, you don't want your tools moving around on you. And also, I don't know if you've noticed, down in the lower bottom of my saw, I don't have this hooked up to a dust collection. That is something else that I am going to be hopefully working on in the future, as far as getting proper dust collection here. But I definitely have vacuums handy and things like that, so I'm really going to stay on top of keeping the shop clean with dust and all that kind of stuff, because you don't want to get that out of control too, because these machines, they like to create a lot of sawdust. So basically we're going to run the other piece through the saw, and we'll be ready for our first glue up. Now that we have our two edges jointed, let's try putting it together and see how the seam looks. Just going to get rid of some of this wood chipping that we have going on here.
so we could get a flat surface going. It should be pretty darn close. You know what? That's not too bad. Definitely much better than what it was. I think with a little clamp and a little gluage, we should be pretty good. You know, because I'm just sucking that together with my hands. I mean, there's a very tiny gap there. I mean, you're probably looking at, I don't even know, maybe a 1/16 of an or a 1/64 of an inch, but nothing bad. So I think you know, like I said, I'm basically closing up that joint with just my hands. So once I get some biscuits in this and some clamps on it, that joint will be pretty much closed right up. And then afterwards too, once everything is glued up and stuff like that, we'll just look over the pieces once more, and you know, if there's any small hairline openings or anything like that, you know what we end up doing? We end up taking some glue and some fine sawdust that came right from these pieces, and in a sense, just you rub them right into the joints, and it fills it right in. And that way, there, you know, you take some, you know, like I said, the sawdust and a little bit of wood glue, and you rub it right into the joints. You know, we're gonna sand this seam flat afterwards because I don't, unfortunately, have a big enough planer to send both pieces through. That's obviously something that I would love to have, you know, because when you have a bigger planer, you could send something this size right through it and it'll flatten out the entire thing all in one shot. But being that I don't, we're going to just get them glued together, and then once they are, we'll take our sander to it and it'll be nice and flat, and you really won't even be able to notice that seam. So basically our next step now is to get this biscuit jointed and glued up. Okay, next up what we're going to do is we got our two boards milled down, so now we're going to biscuit them together. Basically what we're going to use here is a number 20 biscuit. You know, that's right there what a biscuit, you know, looks like. So we're going to, you know, sporadically put these out through the boards. I'm thinking something, you know, probably like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You want to use enough, you know, because when you're gluing something up this large, you want to make sure that you have adequate clampage and support with your biscuits. So I'm probably going to use quite a few on these just because the piece is so long. So first what we're going to do is, basically what you want to do is get your ends somewhat close together, like that. Put the piece together. And then, like I said, just, you know, just kind of put biscuits where, you know, you feel like you want to put them. I'm going to put one there. And what you're going to end up doing is just drawing a little pencil line, you know, across both pieces. That way when you set up your biscuit joiner, you know to run, I'll show you later on the biscuit itself, on the biscuit joiner, that you're going to set your biscuit joiner right on that mark. And when you go do the opposite side, you know that it's going to get perfectly in line, just the way you've got it set up. So I'm going to put one there. I'm going to do one right there. I'm going to do another one here, there, 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 and one right here on the end. Now you also want to is make sure that you do stay a little bit in from the edges, just because when we do go and finally square these pieces up and cut off the edge, you don't want your biscuit right there at the edge, because if you cut through the biscuit, then on the end of the board you're going to see half of your biscuit. So you want to just make sure that you do start your first biscuit a few inches in. That way, you know, when you go to square up the end of the board, your biscuit's not going to be showing at all. So next we're going to get the biscuit joiner set up, run our biscuits through here, and then we'll glue it up and clamp it up, and then this section will be all set. So basically here on your biscuit joiner, actually I'm going to bring it in a little bit closer just so you could end up seeing. It's going to still be a little tough to see on this model, and I'll actually bring the camera in on a better view of that. But on this model, basically there's this little knob in the back that it's got different settings for different size biscuits. You could set your biscuit joiner up for a number 10 biscuit or a number 20 biscuit. Being that we're using number 20s, I've got this biscuit joiner set up on number 20, so it knows that when you cut the slot in for your biscuit, it's going to leave a big enough slot to accept number 20 biscuit. Now say I had number 10 biscuits here and I had it on the number 20 slot, it would still cut in this, because these are all roughly the same thickness. It's how long it is the issue. So even though the thickness of it would still be correct, when you put the number 10 in there, it would be so loose the biscuit really wouldn't be doing what it's supposed to be doing. So you definitely want to make sure when you are using biscuits that if you are using a number 20 to have your biscuit joiner set up at a number 20 biscuit. The same thing if you're using a number 10. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to biscuit all our joints in right now, and we'll get it all glued up. Oh, and by the way, I did find a newer pair of safety glasses, so I will put those older ones away and kind of just save them for, for a rainy day, I guess. But these are much nicer and probably a little bit more pleasant to look at. So basically, and the other thing too is when you're doing this, because again, you're always moving your pieces of wood around, so the biggest thing when you're doing this kind of stuff is you want to make sure that you mark all your pieces and just kind of keep them oriented in the same direction, the same way, especially if grain is a big issue for you, because a lot of times here, with pine I don't do it as much because as you could see on this board, the grain is just kind of all over the place. There's not a real set grain. So I'm not too concerned about it when I work with pine. But when you're working with some other woods and stuff, it's nice to orient your boards to where the grain, especially when you're doing a biscuit glue up like this, it's nice to have your grain kind of in a sense match up. That way once it is all glued up and you're looking at the piece, it then almost looks like it came from one big solid piece. So just little things that you want to just keep in mind when gluing up big boards like this. Like I said, in this case, being that the grain is kind of all over the place as is, I wasn't too concerned about what the grain looked like when it came together. So I'm not too concerned about that. But like I said, just kind of just put like little marks, little X's or stuff like that. Just little things that in your own mind how to keep your board straight, because like I said, I'm going to move this piece and get it out of the way to biscuit one. You want to make sure that you put it all back in the same way. You don't want the boards to get flipped around and then you're like, oh, why isn't this going together? It gets very frustrating. So just put like little marks and stuff like that. Nothing too heavy because you don't obviously you don't want to spend a lot of time sanding those marks off, but just like a little dash or something like that to keep the board straight. So take this here. So now basically on your biscuit joiner, you've got some different marks here, and basically you have a center mark right here. That's your center of your biscuit cut. So basically you line that mark up with that little pencil mark that you put on there before, and you make your cut there, and then when you do it on the other board you do the same, and then when you glue it up you know that the board is exactly where you want it to be. I don't know if you've noticed, when I did put this piece down, I did exactly what I knew was going to happen. The piece got flipped upside down. So now, say I was to just slide this piece forward and then bring this one in, the two pieces would be backwards from each other. So basically I just got to take this guy, make sure to hit anything, flip that guy around like that, get this guy, put him there, and then when I put my biscuits in, they'll line right back up. I know my 2 marks are over here, which I made, and we're pretty much ready for glue up. So let me get the biscuits ready and we'll be all set to go. Okay, basically now what we're going to do is glue it up. Basically going to use some just regular, Titebond glue, Titebond number 3 glue. I'm going to basically squeeze the glue into all the joints. Get some of that old glue off of there, if I can. There we go. Okay, so basically I'm just going to take the glue and just run a nice, generous bead in there, and just do that for all the joints. Get it all in there. Okay, and then basically what we're also going to do too is not only put the glue in the joints, but we also want to put a nice bead of glue down the center of it as well. So not only do we want the biscuits to be all glued in, but we want the edge of the boards to be glued together as well. So we did that. Close that. We're going to take our biscuits and basically just push them into our slots, like so. Try not to get glue all over you. I know sometimes it's difficult. And what we're looking for here too is to make sure that you know you have enough glue out, is that on the sides of the biscuits where there's still a little bit of space in the slot, you'll see the glue kind of ooze out. That means you know that that biscuit's in there and there's plenty of glue in the slot. And sometimes they get to be a little tricky as far as going in. I don't have a hammer on me, I believe. Nothing handy. So I'm just going to take the edge of my clamp, not approved hammer, and just kind of just tap them down a little bit just to make sure that they're in there. Should always have a rubber mallet handy as well. Okay. So now basically we'll lay that guy down. We'll lay this guy here down. And we'll push it together. Now if it doesn't go all the way together with your hands, I mean, mine actually did, because once you do get it lined up, it should go right together. But sometimes, with the biscuits, they start to swell a little bit, so it makes it a little bit tight to get the pieces together. But so, like, again, just keep a rubber mallet handy, and you can kind of tap it together. Now we're just going to take some clampage here. One more thing I'm going to do, just to make this a little bit easier to clamp, is I got a couple scrap pieces of wood here. Just because of the type of clamps that I'm using, it's easier when the piece is just a little bit elevated up. I could get the clamp on there a little easier. So take that and basically and usually what I like to do is roughly like right about where the biscuits are, put a clamp, because that's where your holding power is going to be. So there's that guy. it's going to suck together nicely. It's going to be real good. Definitely want to make sure you get ones on your ends. One there. And this is where you can never have enough clamps. Unfortunately, that is something that I'm still accumulating and that you should always accumulate, because again, you can never have enough clamps regardless of what project you're working on. But for now, I've only have a few that are this large. This one wants to fight me a little bit. For some reason. Okay. Going. Okay. Nice and tight. Very good. Very good. I do have one more here, which I think we're going to put. And again, you know, you'd be the judge of it. You know, see where there might be a gap or something like that, to where you want to tighten it up a little bit. This, I got to say, is actually quite nice. I mean, once the clamps got put on it, it sucked in quite nice. So I'm pleased with that. I think we'll just put this guy right here. These older clamps are a little bit tricky, but we'll get it. There we go. I gotta say, I do like these pipe clamps. They got a lot of strong holding power, I will say. I mean, they'll really suck a board together, that's for sure. I mean, obviously these other ones are quite nice too, but those, for some reason, I just feel like, you know, you can't really beat those. They got a really good clamping force on those. So, but that's pretty much that piece. So we're gonna let that sit now for a little bit, let the glue set up, and then we'll come back probably in about 20 to 30 minutes and just scrape off maybe the surface glue before it completely dries. So we'll do that, and then we'll let it sit for a little bit longer, and then this piece is pretty much all glued up. Now, that process that we just went through, I pretty much have to do that, I believe, 4 more times, because we need 4 more of these little mock-ups to get all the sides, tops, and bottoms to our toy box. So basically, I'm going to do that another 5 more times, and once we have everything glued up, we'll come back and machine all of them down to size.